back to the 3x5 Life
podcast.
On this podcast, we try to dive into topics like self-development, mindset, productivity, well-being. And last week we spoke about Bryan Johnson and his work at Optimize that really exemplifies those things to the next level. I went through his coaching program actually 2 years in a row, like I mentioned on the last podcast. We'll have links to his website. He's giving away all his like philosopher notes for free. And then you can even sign up for his coaching program, which we spoke about last week, for like a crazy discounted price that kicks off in January 2nd or 3rd. But this week we are speaking about...
We're going to talk about the 5-second rule, and not the one you're thinking about when you drop food on the floor and you have 5 seconds to put it in your mouth.
I like what you did there.
But that's actually a myth. You don't have 5 seconds. The germs will still infiltrate your food. So don't participate in that. But this is Mel Robbins' 5-second rule. I was listening to an interview with Mel Robbins, and this is something that has been around for a little bit, but we talk a lot about habits and productivity and creativity and ideas and fear and courage. And I thought that this was such like a timely topic because, you know, you may have, and we all have incredible ideas. And I think sometimes we blame lack of motivation on why we don't actually see these ideas through fruition. But what Mel Robbins talks a ton about is the actual bias of our brains. And so our brains are wired to recognize fear or anything that like gets us out of that comfort zone and shuts it down automatically. It wants to keep us safe. So if you're feeling like there's an anxiety around a new idea or there's something that you're scared of not being able to complete it in the way that you want to, our brains will talk us out of actually creating that action step. And so I thought that it was kind of neat to think about this from a biology standpoint of like what happens in our brains when we do have ideas and how we can use this really, really simple tool to move us out of thinking to action. She talks about in the podcast how there are two types of people. There are people who have a bias towards action. And these are the people that, you know, sometimes we identify them as being like reckless, or sometimes we identify them as being fearless, right? Where they're able to just act on things in a way that you kind of like envy. That is not the norm. Most people actually fall into the category of the bias towards thinking. And I'm sure we all can recognize that we have this idea, and then if we don't act right away, they actually say that you have like a 5-second window from ideation to action before you start to second guess yourself, and which is where the 5-second rule came about. But if you think about that idea of, well, how do we then tap into that action before we talk ourselves out of it? You literally count backwards. So she created this system. She was going through a really hard time in her life. She was suffering from anxiety. She was having a hard time getting out of bed in the morning. She said she was like watching a commercial, and it was like a rocket launch commercial where they counted backwards. And in her head, she was like, tomorrow I am going to launch myself out of bed. And so when she was laying in her bed that next morning, instead of pressing snooze, she counted backwards, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and jumped out of bed. And then she kept repeating this pattern. And at the time, she hadn't done the research to recognize like, okay, well, why did this work? And she really was thinking like, this shouldn't work, but it is. And then when she started to look at the brain and how it functions, she recognized that the basal ganglia, which is kind of connected to motivation. It's a part of our brain towards the back of our brain. And when we're in that cyclic thinking, thinking where we're second guessing over and over, when you count backwards, you interrupt that habit loop, and then it moves you into your prefrontal cortex, which then kicks into action. Right. So there is science behind this simple trick. But when you can close the gap, right? Like the idea is to close that gap between, you know, who you are capable of being and who you are actually being. And if it's something as simple as counting backwards, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. I think interrupting that loop and that cyclic thinking and that negative bias that we've talked about before, this is something that you might want to try to help stop that procrastination loop.
Yeah. And I mean, I read the book not long after it came out, and I implemented it for cold showers. So when I take a cold shower, I usually start with it warm and then I end with cold. But I wanted to just go straight cold, but that can be painful, especially in the winter. And I think I read the book around the winter time, and the next day I was just like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. But I would say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's get this bleep done. That was my little.
Oh, look at you, add on.
Yeah. And then I would jump into the cold water, and it worked. And to this day, it still works. That's like one very practical way that I have used the tool, but it was amazing how it would just almost just force me to rocket launch into the cold water.
Mm-hmm. And think about like enter anything into something that you're just kind of like putting off, and tying it back to the cards. I mean, sometimes the things that are on that to-do list follow us from day to day to day. And it's really something as simple as like making a phone call or something that you have to do that you're just like putting off for whatever reason. And having that idea, well, you're looking at it that day and you're like, okay, well, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I'm going to do it. Yeah. And then having the power of just like crossing it off your list, because it's those small, tiny habit changes that help us move towards that large, bigger goal.
Right. And well, it's like everything in life, all our trajectories, our lives are moments. They're decided in moments. Mm-hmm. When you're in the line and you say, oh, I really want some pizza, but that salad is what I should get. And you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I'm ordering the salad. Mm-hmm. You know, those little moments compound over time in every aspect of our life. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think this tool, as silly and as like, I mean, she got so much heat when this came out, mm-hmm. but then she's like one of the top speakers pre-COVID. She was like the top speaker, traveling around speaking at corporations because it's so simple, but so powerful.
And tying it back to like a mental health standpoint, she was talking about how she was working with a group of nurses and people who were working at a psychiatric ward in Philadelphia. And it was for people who were suffering from like addiction and coming down from addiction. And she said, you know, besides the use of medication, this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 5-second rule was the second leading tool that they utilized to help people in recovery. Because of that, am I about to use, am I going to, you know, make this decision, when you could interrupt that thinking loop and then do an action of like, I'm going to do something else instead. It was such a game changer for people who are recovering from addiction. So if you think about even suffering from anxiety, sometimes we just get into those cyclic loops and, you know, you're laying in bed and you're thinking about all the things that could possibly go wrong and you're listing them and it's like over and over, and just interrupting that loop for just a moment, not even from like a procrastination standpoint, from like a mental health standpoint. What an awesome way, like thing that you can actually tap into and utilize a tool. So
yeah. And that's the thing that we want to bring on this podcast, little tips, I don't want to say tricks, but ways that we can kind of interrupt the system to become better every day. Mm-hmm. And this is a tool that has worked for me. It's worked for thousands of people. So we just wanted to share, you know, what we've learned.
And if you want to share with us, we'd love to hear, you know, what is something that you've been kind of stuck on or in with getting motivation or being able to kind of create those habits behind, and then maybe try to utilize the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 rule, the 5-second rule this week. And then give us some feedback in the community, because it's always so nice to share. If something's working for you, it could totally work for others too. So
sounds good.
All right.
I hope you guys enjoyed. Until
Have a
next
great
week.
Take care.
Hello world, wake me up to another good